Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome. We never know where you are. Erin and I have just been talking about that because thanks to the internet, you could be up a tree in the Philippines and you could be watching this next year as a podcast. It's all amazing technology, eh? What did we do before? What did we do without it? Anyway, enough of me rabbiting on. Ex-Christian Erin is my guest, and here she is.
Hi.
How the devil are you, Erin?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you. Thanks for having me on today.
You're welcome. You're an excellent guest because, of course, you're a broadcaster or a live streamer yourself. So I've got to watch out because you'll probably try and host me.
I'll turn it around and start asking you questions.
Yes. It wouldn't be the first time I've had that happen. Anyway, I don't know very much about you, to be honest, because you've only we're friends on Twitter, I think it is, rather than Facebook. Facebook is a bit sometimes, isn't it? But Twitter is not quite so.
Yeah.
So this is the first time we've actually spoken, and unusually, my guests, I've chatted to them before, but you being a pro broadcaster,
I wouldn't call myself that. I have been graciously been guested on other people's channels for the most part. I am not very tech savvy myself, but I have had quite a few really good conversations on other people's channels. And then I've just recently been breaking into actually hosting things myself.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly not camera shy, microphone shy, or anything like that. So I'm going to call you a professional.
Okay. I'll take it.
Right. So the point about this show is for the guest to star. It's not about me. It's about you. Oh, you're that side, aren't you? StreamYard reverses everything. And I don't know very much about you. So this is your opportunity to tell us. Now, a few minutes ago, before we started streaming, we were chatting and you revealed that you're not in Austin, Texas, although that's where you go out. And of course, you could be anywhere, as I was saying before I brought you on camera. And where are you exactly? I mean, don't mean exactly.
I am on the west coast of Canada, not too far out of Vancouver, Canada.
Very nice. Lovely part of the world. You've had some fires, haven't you, in the recent past?
Yeah. This last summer was, again, we had a few summers where it wasn't so bad. Three or 4 years ago, we had another bad one. But this summer was really tough. We had a lot of forest fires, a lot of evacuations. My in-laws and a lot of my husband's family are from the areas that were on fire basically all summer. So it was pretty stressful time. We had basically an open invitation for family. Like if you are being evacuated, you can come here. It was quite scary. Yeah. And just the air quality where I live, we live in the valley just outside of that area. So the smoke would just flow right into our streets. And so we were kind of stuck inside quite a bit too, because the air quality was so bad.
You didn't want to breathe it. Yeah. Well, I've got some other friends in the Vancouver area or in the British Columbia part of Canada. One's actually a fireman. So he was involved in fighting these fires. Yeah. Not a good scene. Anyway, tell us about ex-Christian Erin, because you've been on a journey, haven't you? I mean, we can tell your name is a giveaway.
Yeah, it does kind of stick it. It's a spoiler alert right there.
You were a Christian and now you're ex. So how did that happen? I'm going to full screen you and let you tell my audience and anybody else who stumbles across us all about how you became the Erin you are today.
Okay. So
here we go.
I was raised in a Christian home. I had a little bit of influence from different denominations. My parents were separated when I was quite young, and my mom and my stepdad went to a Pentecostal church, and my dad always went to the Baptist church. So it didn't matter where I was always being taken to church, Sunday school every weekend. And then to add to that, my extended family was kind of part of a Presbyterian kind of denomination. So I didn't understand growing up that there's actually quite a lot of different theologies and stances on things in those different denominations. And so it makes more sense of why I was very confused even as a young child. But I've always said that it was the Pentecostal theology that stuck for me, probably because I did live with my mom and my stepdad. So that was the one that was reinforced a lot at home. And so when I say Pentecostal, I mean that not necessarily these I mean, yes, we were fundamentalists, but we were quite modern. They had lots of music at the church, drums, and all of that. I would say the emphasis was on encountering the Holy Spirit. Yes. Charismatic, a lot of people would call it. So there was speaking in tongues. There was a lot of kind of hands-on prayers, things that I would even things I've had to explain to other people who are Christians. We did things called fire tunnels. That's where like everybody was lined up at the altar and you would put their hands like kind of facing each other and someone would walk through it and you'd kind of start going into the tunnel in a kind of a prayer stance. But then by the time you came out the other end, you're most likely falling on the ground or shaking. I spent a lot of time doing other things besides just church. I did Awanas, which is like a Bible memorization, kind of like Girl Scouts, but for Bible memorizations.
Summer camp sort of thing.
Yeah, and then that was a totally different story. I went to summer camp starting at age 9, and it was always go ahead, stop me at any point.
I'd like a little detail. Can we track back to when you went through the fire tunnel and you were shaking? So why? I mean, how does that? Was it an expectation, or how was it? I don't know. Explain. How did that emotion come about?
So, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I feel like I have lots of naturalistic explanations for it now. So, as a kid or a young teenager, it was there was an expectation. The language would be that if you kind of draw near to the Spirit, that He will come near to you, and everybody kind of had a different way of that manifesting in you. So I will say that like the pressure was really high because you have all these adults who were the ones encouraging and like the pastors and all the people that were my parents' friends, and everyone else was doing it. So there was always quite a bit of pressure. And I can still remember like the experience of like walking through that. I mean, if you did that with a group of secular people, it would be weird too. Like the amount of focus that's put on you, and everybody's looking at you, and people are touching you. The people who are praying for you are doing things like speaking in tongues. A lot of them were already kind of shaking. So the immense energy, or like the endorphins, or like the adrenaline that I think can run through you. But there was always kind of this aspect that like I still had to I had to do something. Like it wasn't ever really something taking over me completely. There was always like a consent that I had to give to to like engage in that kind of behavior. So
interesting, because it's a sort of cathartic thing in that you were releasing the emotions that had built up, but it's also a sort of method acting thing in that you were channeling those emotions to do the performance that the audience seemed to demand.
Yeah, that's a great way to that's a great description. I've never heard that before. It is a lot like that. I would say that I've likened it to if you've ever been at like a rock concert where people start moshing or like the whole audience starts jumping. There's an energy to that, and even if you're feeling quite like no, like I'm not going to do it, it's so easy to get wrapped up in it, and all of a sudden you're with the crowd, and you're also like hollering and mosh. I've never really like been in the front of the mosh pit really, but you start jumping, you get into it. There's music involved.
Well, there is a reversible connection there, isn't there, between the brain and behavior? I mean, the brain can initiate behavior, but behavior can also initiate a feeling in the brain.
Yeah,
it works both ways, and this is why is it the Hindus? I can't remember which particular religious sect, but they do twirling, don't they? The whirling dervishes.
Yeah.
And it does induce a sort of trance.
Yes. Yeah, I think you can like you said, kind of reverse engineer what's happening. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too, that like my
end of interruption. I'll put you back on screen.
Where was I now?
Sorry.
So summer camps. So summer camp was something that I lived for as a kid. It was by far the highlight of my year. I started going when I was 8 years old. So started off with children's camp, then it was junior teen camp, and then senior camp. And by the time I was in senior camp, I was starting to do counseling. So I would start going there like one or 2 weeks of summer, because we also did family camps. And by the end of my grade 12, my high school year, I was doing counseling as well for so that's like a head camper. I was doing that for weeks at a time. And then later on, I even became like a head counselor for 1 year, which was like I was in charge of like all the girls in a certain dormitory.
So this is how it works, isn't it? All the religions want to get children when they're young. Mm-hmm. And then they spot the ones which are most engaged and most gifted and promote them until they become in what will be a suitable word, engulfed.
They make it your it's your whole life at that point. Like everything about you somehow is connected back to the church, like who your friends are, and what, just everything, what kind of books you're reading, everything is kind of wrapped up in that Christian worldview.
And at that point, you have an enormous amount to lose if you quit.
Yeah.
So you're trapped.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So now we're coming to the interesting bit about how you did get out, aren't we?
Almost. This is kind of where my story gets a little bumpy, because I had gone to all these summer camps thing, and at one point I actually really wanted to become a youth pastor. Like I really wanted to get involved on a leadership level, because like you said, I was really committed at this point. So right after high school, I decided to do a missionary trip team. So I joined this team that was based in Canada, and it was for a year long. So I spent a whole year on this team. And we did a lot of volunteer work, obviously, around Canada. We did a bit of traveling. We went to Mexico. We had planned on going to Haiti, and we ended up coming to the UK, which is really funny.
Really?
Yeah.
Where did you come?
I came and did missionary work in the UK, because we accidentally, or not accidentally, but right near the end of our trip, we'd been planning to go to Haiti, and then the Haitian government denied our access. So we ended up going to the UK and basically continued what we were doing in Canada. So doing street ministry, running youth groups, and going to recovery homes, and spending time with people.
Yes. So the UK, it was a poor substitute for Haiti.
It was very anticlimactic. Yeah.
So whereabouts in the UK did you come? Because I'm based.
I'm gonna forget the names of everywhere, but we flew into London. We spent some time in. I'm gonna forget the names right off the top of my head. Tamworth, is that a city?
Yeah.
To Tamworth, and then another city that was north of that, and then we did go up to Scotland for a while. We were in Edinburgh and Glasgow and Dumfries, and then we worked our way back down and then went home.
So you had a tour of the UK.
Only we weren't allowed to see any of the tourist sites because we were there for our mission for Jesus. I feel very sad about the fact that I never got to, other than the Edinburgh Castle, I didn't actually get to be a tourist. So I have to come back sometime.
You should. We're very lucky to have this country. It's a lovely place.
Beautiful.
Do come again. We're still here.
Yeah. So one of my part of my story was that while I was on that team, I was on the team with people from other denominations. And it was probably the first time in my life I encountered people who were just as strong of a believer as me, but disagreed so strongly on some of the doctrines that I held. For instance, speaking in tongues or that kind of thing. Yes. I was meeting people who were, they had a different interpretation of the scriptures, and they were like, it's only for a certain time and place, and it needs to be edified and interpreted. Otherwise, it's just vanity. And so by the time I was done with missions team, I had quite a bit of, I would look back now, call it cognitive dissonance. At the time, I would have said, I'm really struggling with my, I'm really struggling to understand the scripture. So I immediately went and did a year in seminary and started taking biblical studies.
Oh, right. Can I pop in there? Because
of course,
you've touched on this before, haven't you? You've touched on how your early life, you had a father who was, Baptist, and a mother who was Pentecostal, and you also had relatives who were in a third denomination. I can't remember which one that was.
Presbyterian, so they leaned a little bit more Calvinistic.
It's more Scottish. Yes. So, and now you're meeting even more people, because of course the UK back then, I think this is probably getting on for 15 years ago, and we were even then pretty much heathen.
And that was huge. That was really hard for me to go somewhere, and I'm like this on fire, like kind of hyper spiritual Pentecostal, and I'm going and sharing the gospel, this like super exciting news, and meeting people who are like, okay, cool, like I'm
what
sounds like a interesting religion that you're in, and like there was such apathy, and I think that was such a huge like kink in the chain of like how I expected it to happen. I've always been like, it's the gospel. It's like this exciting news, and meeting people who are like, yeah, we've already heard about Jesus, which is not really a big deal here.
That's right. Yes. Well, I want to tell you an anecdote now, because we have a new Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who is much more evangelical than any of his predecessors. And he's noticed that over the previous century, the interest, the devotion to the Anglican Church, the Church of England, which he is head of, has dwindled. Pretty much throughout the 20th century, the 1900s, the attendance at church dropped off. You could go to a church and there would be 8 very elderly people in it, and that would be their congregation. And so he's determined to do something about it. And he thinks, being, more evangelical, that the way forward is to sort of sidestep the existing fabric of the church, which is, we've got churches in parishes that go back hundreds of years, right back to the Norman conquest, pretty much. And but he thinks that those churches, with most of them have got a wheezy old organ, and he thinks they're so out of touch, and he's right, that he wants to become more modern, more evangelical, with guitars and drums, as you were saying. And so he's thinking, he's got a sidekick, the Archbishop of York, who he's appointed recently out of the same mold. And between them, they've come up with this new strategy, which consists of bypassing the existing parishes and the churches and getting people in their homes, really keen young people who are excited about the news of Jesus, to hold meetings that are not in a church, but in a private house. And he thinks that this will reinvigorate the Church of England. Now, I want to finish this anecdote by reporting what was written in the Church Times, the church's own, not entirely its own newspaper, but a newspaper that's dedicated to the Church of England. And one of the correspondents in there wrote, "This is like the Church of England throwing off its buildings and its staff and running naked into a world that couldn't care less." I love that. And you're right, it's apathy. There's a lot of it. Very few people in the indigenous population of the UK are very fervent about a religion. Sorry, I've interrupted you again.
No, that's okay. I was just thinking like that whole concept of we need to like get back into the home churches. Like that sounds like they're like about 20 years behind what was happening in Canada. Like in the 90s, there was a lot of people breaking away from doing the big churches, and they started, oh, we need to get back to the roots of our faith, and they would start holding services in gymnasiums, and really there's a big focus on home groups or life groups they call them, where
And
it's like
home
yeah, like
tuition.
yeah.
Not even
Yep.
proper schools.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that pulling just back from that culture as well. But yeah, it hasn't worked out well for the evangelicals in North America. It seems to just make small little pockets of radicalized smaller groups that are become more and more disconnected from the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the problem here is that there's no agreement about God.
Yes.
Everybody wants their own.
Yeah.
They want a God that will agree with them.
Yeah.
Rather than.
And that plays a huge part of my story too, was that growing up in the Pentecostal church, there was always this emphasis that we wanted to be like the first church. So, I mean, most of our thoughts on how to do church came from the book of Acts. And so there was always this kind of expression, we need to be like the Acts church. So I'm maybe skipping a big chunk of my story because in the next like 10 years, basically, I stayed a Christian, even though I had moved away a little bit from Pentecostal theology, and I started going to a Baptist church, or a non-denominational church, was just like a Pentecostal light kind of church. So that, but later on in my life, like I was really starting to struggle with doubts. Part of my story is that I struggled with depression, and I started seeking proper help for that. And some of the stuff I was learning about how to best care for myself really went against what I was taught at church. It turns out that when you think of yourself as a wretched sinner, that can actually affect your self-esteem. And
what a surprise!
Yeah,
that's the intention, surely. I mean,
yeah.
When they get children very young and tell them what horrible hell they're going to go to and how they are all sinners, then the inevitable outcome
I actually believe them. So I spent a good chunk of my
self-esteem. You're going to think you're dirt, aren't you? And that's the point, because then they can control you.
Yeah. So I really took that message seriously, that I was broken from the very beginning, and that I was undeserving of salvation, but that like it's a really twisted kind of once I started looking at it from the other angle, it's pretty diabolical message to tell somebody that like you are actually you are undeserving, and it's only because of God's love that he's going to oversee your awfulness and let you go to heaven. And so
this is gaslighting.
Is. So the more I got into trying to take care of myself mentally and getting proper help and learning about things like our cognitive biases and our distortions, and realizing that really went against what I was taught as a Christian. So that's when my doubt started snowballing. And then if I can go back to the thing that I was saying before, I was really at a place where I would say I had no idea the terms for it, but I was like deconstructing my faith, and I had so many questions about it. And so I kind of held on to this thing that I'd been taught when I was younger, that I just need to get back to what the true faith is. I need to get back to what the first church was and what the first, like what they were teaching, because maybe something's like been twisted in the histories or whatever. So I really dived headfirst into biblical criticism and textual criticism, and tried to get into the historical Jesus kind of conferences that have been and much to my dismay, I realized that the first church was really not united either. And there was all these different sects of Christianity, and that they had no idea. And it was just as confusing and split and disorganized as it is now with all the different denominations. So, and that really rocked my world. And learning things like the order of the New Testament, and that the Gospel of Mark came first, and that the long ending with the resurrection appearances that was never in that. And like, those are the things that really started to crack the formations of my faith.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
They've stitched together all the bits that they think are best for their mission, their propaganda of control, basically, and left out, skated over all the other bits, and hope that nobody else reads them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then,
I'm,
so
su- I'm just going to say I'm not surprised to hear, and I'm sorry to hear that you've had depression, but I'm not surprised because so many people I've interviewed in this show have come through a period where they were confused, and that led to uncertainty, which is, you know, a major cause of depression. And they've found a cure, no, an alternative way, either by dumping the whole thing, which is pretty much what you seem to have done, or by getting deeper into a particular religion. For example, there was, I debated a Muslim about a year ago, and you can see this online. It was.
I watched part of it just not too long
Did
ago.
you?
Yeah.
And he was telling how terribly depressed he was and pretty much suicidal. And thank you for watching it, by the way. And it seems to be part of the journey.
Yeah.
In his case, his solution was to find Islam.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that too, because part of my story was that when I was struggling so heavily with my belief, I actually dove, I guess the word is, I committed the most my last year as a Christian.
Really?
I fought for it the hardest that last year.
Yeah.
I really believed that maybe the confusion was just part of my, like, you know, part of my testing of my faith, and so I committed way more than I had in the years before. I had young kids, and I was like, I'm going to teach them about Jesus. I'm going to make sure they get to Sunday school. I'm going to try to go to church every week. Attending women's Bible studies and that sort of thing too.
And they say that, don't they? Because they've obviously, over the centuries, they've met this sort of weakening of faith, and they've got tactics to sort of bring you back in, haven't they? They say, well, you must try harder. You must be even more fervent with your praying, or whatever tactics they use.
Well, and it really backfired for me, because I started going to women's Bible study every week, and I was also getting help with counseling and things like that. And so the stuff that I was getting taught at women's Bible study, and this is not anything new, but I just started hearing it differently, because they really, especially, I mean, it's hard on everybody, I think, but there is a certain dynamic that the women get taught in evangelicalism, and it's basically this idea of just constantly at service at service of other people. So you're constantly wearing yourself out really thin.
Particularly your husband.
Yes. And you just are constantly looking at, what are you doing wrong? There's this intense pressure that if your children aren't being taught about Jesus right now, then they're going to become these sinful, you know, get into a life of debauchery. The pressure is insane.
They're trying to pull a guilt trip on you.
Yeah. And like, there's an idealization of, like, one of the last Bible studies I went to, it was all about the story of Mary, and it just hit differently the last time, because they were like, she just said yes. She said, "Yes, Lord, your will be done." And I'm just thinking, like, so is that what they want from us? Is just to always just say yes, and to never, have no boundaries, have no self-care. Like, I've been doing that for a long time, and it seems to actually be tearing apart my mental health. I don't think this is right. Like, something's not right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, there are people who become mentally ill as a result of religion, and that's why we have organizations that are set up to help them, to counsel them.
I can't say that everything is the church or the fault of the church, but I can really, I was, after I started actually talking to my counselor about what was going on at church, I was actually told that I had religious trauma, and this was by somebody who, even my counselor at the time was a believer, and even he said,
Yeah.
this isn't right. Like you have, and then we started going through the different experiences that I'd had, and I had some trauma from my childhood about being taught about the rapture. I had trauma about being taught about hell. I had trauma because
the rapture isn't even in the Bible, is it?
No, the rapture is one of the first things that I did the deep dive on, and I was like, that's just wild that was such a huge part of our doctrine growing up. But yeah, so I went through the counseling. I kind of pulled back from the church and started spending more time in my in trauma counseling, and I just started to have a huge change in both my mental health and my views on things.
It's a specific version of PTSD.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's very likened to this complex PTSD. So it's not that there's like a car accident or somebody. It's not that there was one thing. It was the fact that it's the fact that you were exposed to something harmful consistently, and it kind of consistently puts you in a state of stress all the time, because
it's worse than being at war then and just being scared by one bomb going off, which makes you frightened of loud noises from then on. This is much more intrinsic,
I would say,
to you.
Different but valid. Yeah, different, and it really works you into your personality, and especially when it's something that you've been exposed to as a kid, it becomes almost impossible to separate the two, because you're going through it at your formative years, and so it becomes part of your personality. And so the huge work that has to be done for people when they deconvert is that they have to go through all the process of separating yourself from this toxic theology, and there's this huge labor of getting to know your true self apart from the theology, because we don't even have much of identity when you're raised like that. You don't have a personality. You're just a clone of these little Christs that they're trying to raise.
You've been subsumed into the biblical expectation of a servant, of a subsidiary person. So at this point, I think we ought to give a shout out to Recovering from Religion Foundation, which Darrell Ray heads, but it's worldwide now, as you know. And I've interviewed Darrell; he's been on my show and one or two other times as well. So people watching this who can relate to the story that Erin is telling us, look for Recovering from Religion Foundation, and you will get help. They don't charge anything, and they've got counselors everywhere.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. It's like one of the best programs that's been put out there for people, because and a lot of people they're even during their journey, like they don't even necessarily, they haven't recognized how hurtful it's been. So then they kind of come to this place where they may have deconverted already, or maybe in the process of it, and then it kind of hits you like a ton of bricks that these things that were taught to me with maybe good intention from people, it's just kind of like, holy, this is I don't know if you allow swearing on your channel, but it's like, that was effed up. Like I think I was really, really damaged by that, and it's a heavy thing to kind of come to realization. I'm so glad that there are organizations out there where you can go there and have a counselor who's going to be a science-based counselor who absolutely will not push you back into any kind of faith. Like that's because that's hard to find. It's really hard to find somebody who won't even kind of suggest that maybe you should go find a church community, because it's been assumed so much that's always going to be a good thing, and it's just not.
Now, with Darrell, of course, he's a psychologist, so he's science-based, like you say. And of course, if there's anybody watching this who's actually in the clergy and has given up, has lost their faith, as the expression goes, but daren't come out, then there's the other organization, which is headed by Dan Barker and one or two other people, that's called the Clergy Project, because it's very difficult if you've been involved to such an extent that your identity is a clergyman's identity. You wear your collar backwards, and it's been your profession to induct other people. That's really hard to escape from. So this is the Clergy Project. Go and search for that. So I'm going to put your commercial up now.
Pardon me?
I'm going to put your commercial up now.
Okay.
Because, this is the show that Erin co-hosts sometimes. She's one of, I think, 3 hosts that you use in Truth Wanted that goes out on the Atheist Community of Austin channel at 5 p.m. on Fridays every week.
Yeah.
And that's central state time in the US, 5 p.m. CST.
Oh, I think I might actually have given you the wrong thing. I think it might be 7. I'm just realizing that because I have the time change here in my head. I think it's supposed to be 7 p.m. Sorry.
Okay, we'll make it 7 then. But the times will change soon anyway, because here in the UK we go off summertime and into GMT, and something like that happens in various states of the US as well. So it's all going to be confusing.
If you go subscribe to the channel, then you'll get the links of when the episodes are coming up, and you'll for sure get the right time. I am notoriously bad for getting my time zones mixed up because I'm on the West Coast here. So I think I got that wrong. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I started, I joined, I guess, the team over at the Truth Wanted a few months ago. I've posted a few episodes so far, and I've got a few coming up here. I'll be on actually this coming Friday, and it's kind of a it's the few days before Halloween, so it'll be a fun episode. It's a fun kind of, it's a call-in show, kind of on the same on the same programs that put out the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen. On Truth Wanted, we're kind of notorious for being a little bit more laid back. We're not kind of the debate me bro type hosts. People can call in. Our favorites are hearing about stories that are like of this weird paranormal kind of thing. So I'm always interested in hearing people's stories about whether they have had kind of maybe a demonic experience and they would attribute it to that, or if they believe in ghosts or conspiracy theories. We talk a lot about conspiracy theories, which is really relevant right now.
Absolutely. You're going to wear a witch's hat?
I am actually. How did you guess? I am dressing up as a witch. And my guest said he's going to be dressing up as well. So it's going to be really, really fun.
Excellent.
Halloween's always been I love Halloween. I wasn't we celebrated it differently. I wasn't not allowed to celebrate as a Christian, but we celebrated it in a kind of Jesus friendly way. So since even just as an adult, even when I was still a Christian, I really embraced it. I think it's a super fun holiday.
Well, I don't approve of it, I'm afraid.
You don't approve?
Well,
that's fine.
It was never really a thing over here. It was very much an American thing.
Yeah, it is different in North. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suspect, because I know that America is a very commercial country, I suspect that it was set up by the sweet manufacturers.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there. I've always just personally liked it for the fact that you get to dress up as something. Like I think it's always been really fun for me to get into you get into a character. So like it's fun to like do your makeup weird and get all creepy for one day of the year. I tend to make my costumes,
spooky fingernails and everything.
I've got 2 kids
and fine.
I usually make their costumes, and we start thinking of our ideas back in September. So it's become that kind of a holiday for me. It's a fun one.
Yeah. Well, that's all fine. But the idea of every house having a great bowl of confectionery inside the front door ready to give out to children so they can rot their teeth is not something that I approve of.
Yeah, that's understandable. We definitely portion it out here at our house. They don't get to just go at it. They get a little piece here and there once they get it. And honestly, my husband and I eat most of it. So
well, that makes it all right then. No. Anyway, you're on this Friday, aren't you? Doing that.
Yeah.
So this will be fun, and you'll be on again periodically on that link that we put up there.
Mm-hmm.
And also you have your Twitter. You tweet quite a lot.
Yeah.
And that's your handle, ExXtian Erin on Twitter, so people can follow you. I'm a follower of you. This is how we found each other. And even the Queen tweets, you know. One tweets, she says.
Yeah.
No, she
That's
doesn't.
funny.
But she does. She has somebody who does Twitter for her. So there you go.
Yeah.
Must be all right if she does it.
Yeah. I found the Twitter community about maybe 8 or 9 months into my major, deconversion and deconstruction, because I really had nowhere to go to talk about things.
Yeah.
I was on Reddit a little bit, but I don't know if you've ever been on Reddit. It's just a kind of a gong show. So I decided to go on Twitter. I'd never been on Twitter before. Opened up account, and I was anonymous for quite a long time on my Twitter, and I just needed a place to express what I was thinking. Like if you go back, you can go through my story backwards if you scrolled all the way back down my Twitter, because there's a lot of angry tweets in there. The first couple of months, I was pissed. I was coming out of something that I felt like I'd been lied to, and that I feel like
I know.
Yeah.
I got a couple of things to say about that. We need an outlet, don't we?
Yeah.
And if you're surrounded by people who are still in the organization that you want to escape from, you can't share with them.
No.
So this is one thing that Twitter and the other social media sites on the internet has enabled us to do. We can go on there, and it's equivalent to banging our heads on the wall.
Oh yeah. It makes you feel crazy when you're starting to come out of the worldview and everybody around you is still so deep into it. And I mean, I talked to only maybe my husband and my best friend were the only ones who actually kind of knew what was going on throughout my whole process. But other than that, I was totally alone.
You're socially cut off, and that's part of their weaponry, isn't it? Because once they've got you in their net, then escape is not an option. And that's why some religions have serious punishments for what they call apostasy.
Yeah.
And I suppose we're lucky at the moment in that you can escape from Christianity fairly softly without death.
Yes, definitely.
Or losing a hand or something like that, which is might be the case if you were in a fundamentalist part of the world where Islam has a theocracy.
Like I have been I'm kind of going through a little bit right now that I have been socially ostracized from my family, because they just fairly recently learned about me being an atheist and being an online activist, and they're quite upset with me. So but I'm not scared for my safety or anything like that. It's just there are consequences, but it's nothing like what people would experience trying to leave Islam, or even the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. There's different sects of Christianity that are the amount of kind of emotional violence that they do towards members who are leaving. It's awful. So I still considered myself quite lucky, even though I'm kind of an outcast right now. We'll see where it goes. I don't think it'll be forever, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, surely they'll come to realize that you're still the same person. It's just as nice as you were before. All you've done is moved out of their club.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Or is that might be too reasonable to expect that.
Yeah, I think it's just really surprising that you can't. I think, and a lot, honestly, even a lot of my conversations on Twitter with believers, I have a lot of people like, oh, it's fine for you to not believe, but why would you speak out against it? And why do you put time and energy and effort into being so vocal about it? And I can just say, because I not only do I not believe it's true, but I think that it on net it's harmful. I think that what you're teaching is harmful, so I'm going to speak out about it, because I think people are getting hurt, even if they don't quite. Maybe they're happy in the little group, but I think that maybe on a mental level, an emotional level, and a lot financially, there's a lot of hurt being caused by it. So I'm going to keep talking about it.
Good. Yes. Well, like, you're an example of somebody who is what might be called a more militant atheist. And I think those people are more like you in that they've been deceived and they've got a grievance because they wasted years. And so they want to strike back. Now, I'm different in that I was never in any religion. So although that doesn't stop people labeling me aggressive and militant, of course, because there's a lot of hatred out there. We've been, I identify as an atheist or an anti-theist, or the new word I came across recently, which is theist.
Mm-hmm.
Have you met that one?
Yeah, I would say in most ways I identify as an theist as well. That it's
Yeah,
just the concepts of God don't seem to be logically coherent to me at all.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you can't even decide whether there is one or not if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah,
It's like a
exactly.
non-starter. It's like the step before deciding to be an atheist.
Yeah. Yeah, my definitions are kind of all over the place too. I've been told that I am a local atheist, meaning like I don't believe in the Abrahamic gods, and I'm agnostic on the idea of any kind of deistic god, but I'm also quite apathetic towards those ideas, because if there is a deistic type god, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, so it's like it kind of depends on what you're talking about, and because there's so much confusion around that, I think
Yeah,
agnostic is probably the best label.
yeah.
Yeah.
Leave me alone. Let me get on
Yeah,
what I want to do.
you tell
Yeah,
me first how you define your God, and I'll tell you if I think it's
if it's
coherent
credible.
or not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Good position.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you think religion is harmful? I
Overall.
agree. I agree with you. Yes,
Overall.
there's
I think there are
scales,
some
isn't it?
a scale for sure.
There's moderate people who do good. They raise money for children's homes and such like. But you don't need to be religious to be able to do that. You can be a secular person and contribute to charities. So religion is not compulsory there. It's not at all necessary there. But on the other hand, lots of things are done in the name of a God, which people who don't have a God don't feel the need to do. I mean, I sometimes get told that I don't have any morals, that I'm like Stalin.
Yeah, I've been called that too.
And I say, well, do you really think that Stalin killed all those people for no God? Do you really think he wanted to please no God? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I think bringing more education and telling people about secular humanism as a very viable option to kind of still get your community from, and still get
yes,
and even if you don't want to take on any labels, you can absolutely, most people
yes,
do have a lot of care about other people's well-being, and there's
yes.
nothing stopping you from volunteering at a soup kitchen.
No,
You don't have to be a Christian to do anything like that, and the
no,
best part is you don't have to trick anybody. You don't
no.
have to hold a sandwich out and say, okay, you can have this, but come to my church service tonight, or anything
Yes,
like that.
that's right. Yes, this is conditional. Here's
Yeah.
here's my here's my help, but
Exactly.
there's a hidden message behind it. Yeah.
I think it speaks to the fact that there's kindness in the world without the Christian framework, or any kind of religious framework. That means that anytime that a person who is kind to you that has no religious framework, it means they're actually just doing it out of the goodness of
Yes.
their humanity. When
They're
I'm nice to
genuine.
somebody, I'm not being nice because I'm trying to convince them about Jesus. I'm just nice because I'm trying to be a good person.
Well, that's right. You only need to be human to be
Mhm.
nice, or not even that, because we can see other social animals
Yeah.
behaving empathically towards each other. So
Yes.
this is something that we have evolved. And it doesn't require any religion or any celestial agency.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm fully on your side with that. So what would you do if I were to give you a magic wand, coming from your new position of an ex-Christian who thinks that religion does more harm than it does good? As I said, I'm fully in agreement. What would you do? I'll give you 3 wishes for this magic wand. What would you do with it?
Hmm. I'm gonna have to take a sip here and think about that.
Well, you,
Hmm.
you, did, you did
I think
mention education, I thought might be one of your...
education.
Yeah.
Let me think. I think that I would want to, yeah. If religion's still going to be in the world, I think that adding a comprehensive kind of education program and
Yeah.
teaching critical thinking skills, it should
Yeah.
be an absolute priority in schools. That um, and that we would move towards like treating all religions kind of as these kind of an anthropological lens, that like this is still an interesting thing to learn about our history,
Yes.
and to learn about how different civilizations viewed the world.
Mhm.
But you know, under the critical analysis, there's so many unfalsifiable things in there. So I think that would be something I would want to change or add to what's going on in with our children, I would say.
Yes.
Um,
Can I
yep.
ask you about your children? Because you were saying
Sure.
you've got 2 children,
I do,
and
yeah.
you've brought them up. At one stage, you were wondering whether to teach them the good news about Jesus, but what has actually happened since?
So my oldest is 9 years old and my youngest is 5. So I
Mm,
started going through this when my oldest was 7.
mm,
And it was part of her curiosity at that age of 7 that really helped push me along, because one of her first questions was, like, how did Jesus make people? Was it kind of like magic? And I had no good answer for her.
yes,
Um,
yes.
so basically, like, they did have some influence from the Christian community, and then as I came out, I also quickly started trying to teach her the science and starting to teach her the things that actually work. So she has really a good understanding of how evolution works and
Mhm,
how we've talked about scientific method.
mhm,
I have been very open with her that, you know, our family, like grandma and grandpa and all these other people, they believe their religion is Christianity. So then that means they believe this about this guy named Jesus. And
mhm.
then your other friend's family is Muslim and they believe this and this and this. And there's actually lots of other religions. So I try to have a really open like
Yes.
treat them all kind of equally. And then I tell her, like, I used to be a Christian and I used to believe that about Jesus. But I don't really believe that anymore, but I know it's really important to certain family members. And so like we kind of have that kind of conversation going.
Mm,
I haven't said anything. I kind of let her lead the questioning, because
yes.
it's not really about my goal here isn't to make sure she doesn't become a Christian. My
No.
goal here is to let her be in control of her own life with all the facts, so she
Yes.
can make an educated decision on it. So she's pretty ambivalent about it at this point. Like sometimes she
Great.
likes going to church still because the music, and sometimes they give
Yeah.
treats out.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
she wants to do that, I will. I think I would probably be a little protective of her. I don't think I would freely send her to youth groups or anything like that.
Mm.
I don't think that's actually a safe environment to send kids to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then my
Mm.
son, who's 5, he just doesn't care.
No.
He hasn't come up yet.
Too interested in kicking a ball, probably.
Yeah, yeah. He wants
Yes.
to talk about cars most of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, we've got a couple of members of our audience here who are regulars. This is Afro-Humanist. Hello, Esther. Thank you for watching us. And Otangelo Grasso, who is an old sparring partner of mine. He's down in Brazil, whereas
I know who Atangelo is.
yes, he's got quite a high
Hi,
profile,
Atangelo.
hasn't he? Yes, and he's got his own view about evolution, and we disagree,
Yes.
basically. Yeah. So, what were we going on to? You've got
my wishes.
education. Education. That's wish number one. We want
hmm
people to have a fuller picture rather than be brought up with one doctrine, don't we?
Yes.
Yes. Especially when the one doctrine is irrational. I mean, you were talking about how Jesus might have made children. Well, the story goes that it wasn't Jesus, it was God, and he made a man out of dirt. But then apparently the dirt ran out and he had to take the man's rib to make a woman. I mean, this is obviously not a realistic scenario, is it?
No, and like it might make sense to a 7-year-old if I had said that to her, because she still believes
Yes,
in a lot of things. She believes in the
yes,
tooth fairy and she believes in
yes,
Santa
of
Claus, and
course. Well, you
um,
keep putting money under her pillow when she loses a tooth.
yeah.
So
And you know what? She came to her own. Actually, that's she figured it out that the tooth fairy wasn't real, and so I'm
yes,
like, well, there we
yes,
go. There's the first step in your skepticism.
yes, brilliant. Yes, we've been
Yeah.
through that. And we have young children in the household too. They've all just gone away, actually. I took them to the airport this morning, and
Aw.
then they're now in having a holiday. So
hmm
It's very peaceful and quiet here, but somewhat lonely.
Yeah.
So,
So for my second wish, can I tell you my other two wishes?
Sure. Can I just put Otangelo to bed, because we're not going to do a debate with you right now, I'm afraid, Otangelo. This is about showcasing my guest. Okay? So you and I can engage in that some other time. Okay? We're going to say goodnight to you for the moment. Right. Sorry. Wish number 2.
Wish number 2 would be that I would wish for there to be, again, a comprehensive mental health access for everyone.
Yes.
And that would be something that was, written into the society all around the world, because I think that if people...
not enough money is spent on mental health. Physical health is quite well covered. Mental health, no.
And I think that there's been a bit of monopolizing from religions on taking advantage of people who are struggling. So I think that if we could increase the treatment for mental health issues and community support that way, it would, first of all, just benefit for people and benefit for everybody, making people aware that these, different mental health and mental illnesses are very real, and there's some very real help, and you can get better. I think that alone would probably cause the new conversion rates to go down, because people won't be desperate and turning towards these magical thinking to get better.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Well, you're right. They do prey on the vulnerable.
I think so.
When I was in hospital, I had a visit from the chaplain, who I soon told him that I wasn't a believer, and we had a secular conversation, because he was a nice guy. But that is where they find their recruits. They get you when you're down, which is despicable.
Yeah, there's even people who are very outspoken about that they're praying for people to hit rock bottom so that they turn to Jesus. Like, I know that's pretty deranged if you think about it.
Look at this.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, you're on our side. Okay. Yeah. Well, there was one more wish.
One more wish. I would wish that all the churches would get turned into community hubs.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of property there that could be better
and
deployed.
You know what? There's one on like every corner practically, and if we turn those into hubs for communities, for different kind of clubs, and create those kind of third spaces for people to go hang out and have. You have your work and you have home, and I think Starbucks has tried to use this model, but I think it'd be great if we had a community place where, and it's open 7 days a week, and so that way we could build on our local communities and get to know your neighbors and your local groups. I think that's what we should use all the church buildings for instead. They can even if they stuck around and they still did church on Sunday morning, let's use them as community hubs for the rest of the week.
Yeah, well, a lot of churches, defunct churches where the congregation has dwindled away to nothing in the UK have turned into other facilities.
Yeah.
There's one in the city in the town near where I live that is an eye hospital, for example.
Oh yeah.
It's a much more sensible usage.
Yeah, I think it's just mostly just such a wasted space, and I'll have a lot of feelings about that, but I'll just say it like that. I think that they should be turned into community hubs.
Yes, something useful.
Yeah.
I can't see Starbucks setting themselves up in churches, though. I mean, yes, they like to be on corners, but in churches, because that might alienate some of their potential customers.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, it'd be nice if these could be secular, or not run by the church. But I think that's another reason why people turn to religion is social isolation, and they're looking for community where they can kind of have a circle of people that they can rely on. And I think if we can have that outside of the religious framework, that's going to be another reason for people to stop turning to these old mythological ideas to get their community.
So Esther is saying that the Sikh community just bought one abandoned church near where she is. Yeah. And I can bring another anecdote to the story, because there's an Anglican church in the town near me that's now an Orthodox Christian church. So they are being redeployed, but not the way we would like.
You know what? The Sikh community, like even that, I think they're doing a better job than evangelicals in my neighborhood anyway. They put out like the amount that they support the community on a non kind of religious level. I don't know if they're like very evangelistic, but like I know that our local Sikh community cooks nonstop for free meals for anybody who comes in there, and I think that's beautiful.
I must get a Sikh guest. Yes, their food is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes. So we've come to the end of our time. You have been utterly fantastic, like I knew you would. And thank you very much for appearing on my show. I'm trying to remember who I can say is going to be my guest next week. And it is Clive Arade. No, it's not his name. Let me get it right. Aruade. Clive Aruade,
cool.
Who is a key person in the they used to be called the London Black Humanists, but no, the London Black Atheists, but they've renamed themselves and they are Black Humanists Association, I think. So awesome. He's going to be my guest next week, and I shall have another interesting conversation with him. He is an ex-Christian of some sort. I don't think he's evangelical, but he will have a story that you might like to hear too.
Yeah, I'll come by, check it out. I just wanted to say thanks for inviting me to come on your channel. Thanks for a great conversation, and it's been really nice talking to you.
I've enjoyed it too. Thank you very much, and thank you, audience. The cream has come to the top as usual. Just a small but select audience, and of course the most of the views we get will be when it's a podcast, because shortly after I stop live streaming, it becomes a podcast, and then it's there forever.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Erin.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.